موسى مولى علي علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله عليهم آواز بلند صلوات
سورة المباركة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، شفيع المذنبين وخاتم النبيين، نبينا وشفينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا بالقاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فإليك يا رب نسبت وجهي، وإليك يا رب مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لدعائي وبلغني منايا، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاؤه البقاء. يا سابغ النعم، يا دافع النقم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أهل. وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد، وهو أصدق الصادقين وقوله الحق. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. Respected scholars, elders of the community, my brothers and sisters in Islam, Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمسابنا بأبا عبد الله الحسين عليه الصلاة والسلام. As we move in the series of lectures that we have dedicated to our fourth Imam, Imam Zain-ul-Abideen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Yesterday we touched on the fact that we had articulated that Imam had three very difficult tasks in front of him. The first was, of course, the announcement of his imamate, the proclamation of his imamate, and to do it in a way that it would not oppose the outsiders, especially the Banu Umayyah. And we talked about it in a little bit of a detail yesterday, and the lessons that we have learned from that proclamation of his imamate. The other task, of course, that he had was, how does he weld the community together? How would he unite the community? As the history says, that the community at that time, after the events of Karbala, there was so much chaos and confusion in the community that it had scattered as if it was a tasbih that had been broken and the beads were scattered. And one of the monumental tasks that Imam had was, how was he going to bring this community together? How was he going to gather the scattered beads with different ideologies, different confusions, different things in their minds? How would he be able to bring them together and unite them into one? The third task that he had is not only one that he wanted to unite the community, but he wanted to unite the community under the banner of the Quran and the Ahlul-bayt. He wanted to unite the community so that the true faith would be provided to them, so that there would be a beacon of light that would guide the seekers towards the truth, and towards safety and security, and towards performing those virtuous deeds, but it had to be done in a way without attending or taking attention from the Banu Umayyah. Because as I've told you before in the last couple of lectures, the Banu Umayyahs were propagating their own theories and their own ideologies in order for them to continue their oppression and their oppressive rule. So he had to do it in a way that would allow the community to have the truth in front of them and to be able to refute that ideology that was promulgated by the Banu Umayyah. So we will talk about his second and third challenges today. We talked a lot in detail about his first challenges. But let's talk about his second and third challenges in a little bit more detail and see what we are able to learn from that. And then how does he progress from that to his next phase in his life after the events of Karbala. So how do you unite a community? That was the question. How do you unite a community where there is so much diversity of ideologies, where there is so much diversity of opinion, there is confusion and there is chaos? And how do you do it so that it's not only temporarily united, but it is sustained in the long run? That was something that he had a challenge in front of him. You see, you think about it and you say to yourself, how do you unite a community? Do you unite a community with physical, with sort of philosophical exhortations? And that's one of the questions that was in front of him. Do I unite them with philosophical exhortations, giving them philosophy behind the deen, philosophy behind the religion, theological exhortations? Is this what I do? If that was the task, or if that was the approach that he had taken, he knew very much that this philosophical exhortation would only be attractive to a small group of people. It would not be something that would unite the common person. The common person who was really not interested in philosophy and the philosophical exhortations of the religion, who was just very much interested in what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil, and what is wajib, what is haram, what is this, what is that. He was not going to be able to unite that person, those people, with philosophical exhortations. And it is important, if you look at the psychological sort of evidence and research on this particular issue, you will see that philosophical exhortations will not really unite a community. Because unity of a community is dependent on an emotion. It is dependent on a feeling that you need to have. You have to have a feeling of unity. It's not something that you can do by giving lectures on philosophy and theology. It has to be a love that develops inside your heart for your other members, for your other brothers and sisters within the community. So the other thing is that how do you unite? So maybe the way you unite somebody is by giving them a joyous occasion, relating something joyful, something happy. Would that unite a particular community? Because if you look at joyful aspects of religion, you would say, well, that's an emotion, isn't it? It's an emotional thing, right? To be happy, to be joyful, right? If you look at, if you have weddings, for example, and graduations and so on and so forth, these are joyful occasions, right? The birth of a baby. And would that unite a community? And he decided that this would also not be a position of unity, even though it induces a feeling. However, you know as well as I do that when you have a joyous occasion, even in your own families, if you have a feud, one brother against another brother, they won't necessarily join you in a joyous occasion, right? If there is a wedding, your daughter is getting married, but your brother is not talking to you, that doesn't mean your brother is going to forget everything and is going to just join you for this joyous occasion of a wedding. So that brought him through the third option that he had. And he used this third option as a means also to unite the community. And he used the option of sorrow and grief. He used the option of sorrow and grief because he knew that the tendency of human nature was to bring us together in the form when there was sorrow or grief within the community. Sorrow and grief succeeds in binding the mourners together, whilst intellectual arguments and joyous functions actually fail to achieve that object. And so what he did, and you see this, right? You see this, that even when you have, for example, in America, right? You have different parties, right? You have the Democrats and the Republicans and all of that. And they're all at each other, right? You know, when there is an election and so on and so forth, everybody is at each other. But if there is a national tragedy that happens, then they all come together. They are, they forget they become non-partisan in their approach, and they come together in the event of a national tragedy. And you see this in many national tragedies, right? Whether it is Katrina, whatever it is, right? You will see that they will put aside their differences and they will join together as a community because they want to be united in the form of a national tragedy. So Imam Zain-ul-Abideen alayhi salam, he uses this particular methodology and this particular approach in bringing the community together. He uses the platform of the mourning and aza of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. He uses the grief and sorrow of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam to bring together people and to be able to unite them under one particular banner. And it is said that that he was always crying and weeping on his father. But he was the first one that officially started the institution of majalis. This institution that we have today was started by our fourth Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. He started this institution, and one of the objectives was that through this institution of mourning and grieving on the martyrdom of the grandson of the Prophet, he was able to bring people together under one roof, no matter what their ideologies were, and to start to bring the beads of the rosary together and unite the community. And he started to do this, and when he did this, the Banu Umayyah didn't have anything to say, because what were they going to say? They were just told that, well, this is a man who is mourning and grieving the martyrdom of his father. He's just crying for his father. That's all he's doing. And so the Yazidiites were kind of thinking, well, he's just mourning for his father, so we don't have any problems with that. I mean, he wants to mourn for his father, he can mourn for his father. This is how he brought people together. Even the institution that we have in our culture, you will see that before there is a wedding, right, we have this thing called Sharwat-e-Shadi. Yeah? You have this here, no? In Orlando, we have Sharwat-e-Shadi, yeah? So Sharwat-e-Shadi, there is always a majlis first that is done before the wedding ceremony happens. It usually happens on a Thursday because the wedding ceremony is usually on a weekend, and there is a Sharwat-e-Shadi majlis on a Thursday. Be very clear when you have that Sharwat-e-Shadi majlis that in that Sharwat-e-Shadi majlis you should recite the Masayib of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. Because this is a sunnah of the fourth Imam. You see, the fourth Imam, after the events of Karbala, he was always grieving and mourning. And what used to happen is somebody, one of his close companions, came to him and said to him, "Oh, my Imam, I want you to come and attend the wedding of my daughter." And Imam said to him that I don't want to attend. He knew that Imam will not attend a joyful occasion. So Imam said to him, I don't want to really attend the wedding it's a joyful occasion, and I don't want to be there because, I don't want to kind of spoil the atmosphere. And the man insisted that no, this wedding will not happen unless you, O Imam, come to the wedding of my daughter. He was a close companion of the fourth Imam. And the fourth Imam said to him, if you want that, then start your wedding with the azar and the masayib of my father, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And this man started the wedding of his daughter with the azar and the majlis of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and it is said that Imam Zain-ul-Abideen attended that particular wedding, and he stood outside. He sat outside the door where people kept their shoes, in a way that he was minding their shoes whilst they were mourning and grieving Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. We don't understand the importance of the majlis. We really don't. And this institution of majlis and mourning and the masayib have now become a focal point of all religious activities of the Shia community, and it has now become the lifeline of the faith of the Shia community. It is this majlis. In later periods, you will see in history, the enemies of the faith, the enemies of the Shia, realize that a vital role that this mourning plays in the education, in the religious education and the building of character of the Shias. And in the past, they tried to stop it by giving fatwas. Because now they realize this has become a really powerful institution. These guys are gathering together, and not only are they grieving and mourning on Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, but they are renewing their faith, and they are talking about their religion, and they are discussing what is right and what is wrong. And it has now become an educational institution, and so they wanted to stop it. So they started to issue fatwas that no, this is not good, this is haram, this should not be done, you should not cry, crying is bid'ah, and all of these things started to come afterwards. Now, of course, they've changed their tactics, right? Now our own people are questioning it. Yeah? Now it is us who's questioning it, mashallah. We've become so educated in the way that we know our deen so well that now we are starting to questioning it and saying, yeah, but he died 1300 years ago, right? 1400 years ago. Why do we have to mourn now? It's done, it's finished. So why do we have to do this now? And we are fully aware that these mourning sessions are the most organized religious sessions that you will ever have. When Muharram starts, the Shia believer has an anxiety in his heart. He starts to think, where is the majalis of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein so I can attend? You will see people on the day of the 9th, 10th, 8th for sure, 8th, 9th and 10th of Muharram, the people who do not come the whole year, but on the 8th, 9th and 10th of Muharram, they will try and look for where is the majlis. They don't look for who's speaking, what kind of a speaker he is. Of course, that's there in some people's minds. Alhamdulillah, it's good. Okay? But a lot of them are just wanting to find out where is the azah of Abu Abdullah happening so that I can attend. Look at the power of the fourth Imam on how he has brought unity in the community by using the majalis of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. We have started to question it now. Even today, this azah is the most feared by the enemies of the Shia. It is the most feared by the enemies of the Shia, and that is why people have the audacity to attack this institution. This is the sunnah of the fourth Imam, my friends, and we need to keep the sunnah alive. We need to keep this sunnah alive. And this feeling of unity through the aza of Imam Hussein is absolutely critical in uniting our communities. Think of this, particular sunnah of the fourth Imam. One of the biggest problems we have right now, and I say this carefully for my youngsters and my youth, who I know will really go after me about this, but I will tell you one thing, that the purpose of the majalis of Imam Hussein, according to the sunnah of the fourth Imam, in uniting the community cannot be achieved by using the internet. I know nowadays I can listen to the majlis at home. I can YouTube whichever speaker I want across the world. I can YouTube the best of the best speakers across the world. Whether he's reciting in Africa, whether he's reciting in Australia, I can YouTube and I can sit in my house and I can listen to the majlis, and I may even cry on the masayib of Imam Hussein. But it saves me all the time in coming to the Husseiniya, in participating in the Husseiniya. And what you will do by this is you will disunite the community. You will disunite the community. The purpose of Imam was to bring people together under one roof, and together you mourn Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, not in your house. Now, I'm not saying don't YouTube, don't look at internet, don't do all of that. I'm not saying that. So please don't get me wrong. Please YouTube as many speakers. I'd rather you YouTubing Muharram speakers than YouTubing some other things that are not so well YouTubed, right? So, you should do that. But do not relinquish your responsibility. Look at the words I'm using, yeah? Your responsibility to come to the Husseiniya to participate in the aza of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. This is the sunnah of the fourth Imam. It's the sunnah of the fourth Imam. You do it in your own home, good for you. But do not, and I know maybe you can't come every day. You can't come every Thursday. Maybe I know there are pressures, so I'm not asking you to do it all the time. But do not just become a rim Muslim. Right? Rim Muslim, Ramadan, Eid and Muharram, right? Do not become a rim Muslim, because even the BlackBerry shares are not doing that well, right? So you don't become a rim Muslim, right? Ramadan, Eid and Muharram. Try and participate as much as you can, because it is the sunnah of the fourth Imam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The next task that he had was that now that he was getting people, he had a way to unite people. The next task that he had, having pronounced his imamat, having looked at how he would unite people, now he would say to himself, how do I manifest, how do I teach them the truth of the religion? How do I present the religion to them, the religion to the people, to the ummah, in a way that would not, that would not get the people of Yazid, the Banu Umayyah, all worked up about it. How do I do this? Because he knew that if he started to just openly give sermons, and he did openly give sermons. He used to give a sermon in namaz, on Friday, in Jummah, every Friday in Masjid al-Nabawi. He used to give sermons. People think that he didn't give any sermons. Every Friday he used to give sermons. Right? This is why we have this personality in our mind of the fourth Imam, that he was just sitting in the masjid doing dua. No, he gave sermons every Friday. But he wanted to do more than that. He knew that everything he was saying, he was being watched by people. And so he decided to choose a particular methodology in order to spread the truth of Islam as taught by the Holy Quran and the pristine teachings of the Ahlul-bayt. And he chose the methodology of dua to do that. Look at the way this Imam is working. Look at how he is tackling each and every situation. So now he chooses dua as a means to propagate the true Islamic teachings. And he starts to note these duas in such a way that he asks his two sons to record this dua, and he gives them the responsibility of recording them in a book and to make sure that it is passed on from one Imam to another Imam. Look at how Imam Sajjad is working. You see, we must look at these du'as not merely as selfish modes of our wishes and desires, but in these du'as are gems of knowledge and wisdom by the fourth Imam. And they are called the Sahifa Sajjadiyya, the Sahifa Kamila, the Psalms of the Ahlul-bayt. It is called the Injil of the Ahlul-bayt. This is, you give this dua, this book of dua, to somebody who is a non-Muslim, and they get absolutely amazed with what the Imam is saying. And the way is what? Now he does this, so how could anybody say to him, don't pray to Allah? The Banu Umayyah could not say to Imam Zain-ul-Abideen that don't pray to Allah, because whenever he would write a dua, they'd say he's just doing dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let him do dua. How can we stop somebody doing dua? Let him do dua. He's praying to God. So they let him do the dua, they let him write the duas, and he started to write the duas and record them. And these duas have now become a treasure of Islamic knowledge. They have become a treasure of Islamic knowledge. And in those du'as, you will find ethical and theological questions answered eloquently by Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. You want irfan? Pick up Sahifa Sajjadiyya. It is a book for urafa. You want philosophy? Pick up Sahifa Sajjadiyya. It is a book for philosophers. You want theology? Pick up Sahifa Sajjadiyya. It is the book for theologians. This is a book, it is so profound in its nature. It is so amazing in its nature. We only sometimes recite this dua superficially, especially in the month of Ramadan, is when we open this book, right? We recite these duas only superficially in a way when we want something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not open this book and analyze it in a way that gives us the truth of the deen that we are practicing. This is what Sahifa Sajjadiyya is. It is a light and a virtue that illuminates the character of the human being. Because of reading these du'as, you start to practice Islam in the way that Islam needs to be practiced. You develop a moral and ethical framework within yourself in this book, which is called the Sahifa Sajjadiyya. This book once was presented to the Egyptian scholars, in the university in Egypt, who are, of course, from the Ahlul Sunnah, and these Egyptian scholars, when they looked at this book, they were thunderstruck by it. They were awed by it. And they were completely amazed and stunned by the purity of thought in the book of Sahifa Sajjadiyya. And I want to quote one of those scholars whose name is Al-Tantawi, or Al-Tantawi. He was an Egyptian scholar who looked at this, and he says, and I quote him, he says, "I have studied this book with utmost care. I have gone through the du'as, and I have gone through the munajats with a searching eye." And then he says, "I was stunned by the lofty meanings and deep sense contained in this dua, in this book. I was deeply impressed by the value and magnificence of these invocations. I wonder how the Muslims all along have been ignorant of such a valuable treasure." This is from an Egyptian scholar who's not a Shia. And he has articulated this. And these du'as now started to wake up the people, and they started to understand. Remember that particular ideology in the first majlis that I talked about, the ideology of Jabr? Yeah? You remember that? The ideology that Banu Umayyah were promulgating, which was the ideology of Jabr, right? Banu Umayyah was saying what? That, you know, what the position that you are in is what Allah has done for you. We have not done it. It is Allah who does everything. You remember that philosophy of Jabr, right? So the fact that you are being oppressed is because Allah wants you to be oppressed. You just have to accept it. And that is how they were ruling. That is how they were continuing their rule. When you look at the du'as of Sahifa Sajjadiya, now Imam Sajjad alayhi salam presents a different way to them. This dua that we recite, dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, right? We recite it on the 23rd night of the holy month of Ramadan. And then we only recite it because it has to be recited. And if it is not recited, wallahi, your amal is not complete. And if the reciter or the person is doing amal or the organizers do not have a program for dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, people will say, Bano mara amal bagari naika aferi. You see, but what we have done is we have just looked at it, we look at the superfluous translation of it, and we don't have any way to deeply think about what Imam is saying in this dua. Look at what Imam says in his dua. He says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad, waj'al li yada ala man dhalamani. He says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, appoint for me a hand against that person who wrongs me. Imam is saying. And then he says, وَلِسَانِ عَلَى مَنْ خَاصَمَنِي. Give me a tongue against that person who disputes against me. And then he says, وَظَفَرَ بَيْنَ آدَتَنِي. He says, and give me victory over that person who stubbornly resists me. And then at one point he says, وَقَدْرَةً عَلَى مَنِ اسْتَحْدَتَنِي. What he says here is, give me power over those people that oppress me. Look at what Imam is saying in this dua. He's saying to Allah that give me power over those people who oppress me. Now he's giving the message to the ummah that it is not good to be an oppressor. It is not good to be an oppressor, but it is not acceptable to be even a madhloom. If you are being oppressed, then you have to stand up against the oppression. You have to stand up against the oppression in whatever way that you can. And it is not a concept of Jabr. The concept of Jabr is not acceptable in the true religion. In the true religion, you have to stand up against those people who are oppressing you. This is Imam giving the message of the religion through the du'as that he has created in Sahifa Sajjadiya. Salawat par Muhammad wa ala Muhammad ke upar. Now he goes further. Imam now, and I just want to mention a couple of examples of this. Imam now goes further. He decides, he knows that the only way to start somebody towards the path of salvation is to make sure that they develop their morality first. Their moral and ethical behavior is the most important component for them to start the journey towards proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does he do? He starts to role model himself. He role models himself so that when people look at him, they realize he is a role model. He is a role model that we need to follow, a role model of morality and ethics, similar to the way that the Holy Prophet did. See, ever wondered why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appointed the Holy Prophet? Of course, the Holy Prophet was the Prophet from birth, right? Before birth, right? But his announcement of his Risala was after 40 years, was it not? Yeah? Yes? Yes, okay, that's good, man, you're awake. Some of you, right? So his announcement was after 40 years. So if his announcement of his Risala was after 40 years, ever wondered why? You know, with Prophet Isa starts to talk. You know, in Surah Maryam you recite, Ana Abdullah, Atani al-Kitaba, wa ja'alani al-Nabiyya. Right? He says to, you know, when the people ask Maryam, you know, about Isa, it is Isa who speaks, right? He says, Ana Abdullah, I am the servant of Allah, you know, and Atani, you know, I've been given a book, and I am the prophet of God. Isa speaks after a few hours, a few days, maybe, right? Isa speaks when he was a child. Why not the prophet? The seal of the prophets, man. He's Nabi, you know, he's Rahmatul lil Alameen, right? Khatimin Nabiyyin, right? If Isa is speaking, we say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should have let Muhammad speak too. When he was just a few days old, he could have spoken. But the reason that Allah did not want Muhammad to speak is that Muhammad was coming with a pristine message. His message was the seal of prophethood. It was the most complete religion that he was bringing. And the most complete religion starts with the building of your moral and ethical behavior. And so for 40 years, the Holy Prophet showed people what is morality and what is ethics. And he didn't confuse that with Risala. He wanted to show people how to live in this world, how to conduct yourself with other people. And that is why he was given the title of As-Sadiq and Al-Amin. Before his Risalat, he was given those titles, so that he would show people this is how human beings should live. And this is what the fourth Imam started to do. He started to show people the basics of morality and ethics. He started to role model it for them so that they may start to develop this ethical and moral framework within themselves. Look at some of the examples, right? You know, we talk about ghiba, for example, is one of the greatest sins that we can commit, right? Ayatollah Dastaghaib Shirazi in his book Gunahana Kabira, he talks about ghiba as being one of the Gunahana Kabira. Very, very great detail he gives on this particular sin and what the punishments are for this particular sin. This ghiba is such that, you know, the Quran says that when a person does ghiba, it is as if he is eating the meat of his dead brother. He's eating the body of his dead brother. Right? This is how bad this particular sin is. Look at what happens. A man comes to the door of the fourth Imam. And he comes to the door of the fourth Imam and he says to the fourth Imam, he says, you know, your neighbor, I heard him today in the mosque and he was saying some bad things about you. And so the Imam says to this man, wait man, just hold on. He goes inside his house, he gets a bowl of fruit and he gives it to this man. He says, go and give this to my neighbor. So this man is looking at him and saying, hello, like, do you understand what I just told you? I said your neighbor was saying really bad things about you. And you're giving me a bowl of fruit to go and give it to him. The Imam says, go give it to him. So this man now goes with a bowl of fruit. He knocks on the door of the neighbor. The neighbor opens it and he said, what is it? He said, I've got this fruit for you. And it is from Imam Zain-ul-Abideen. It is from Ali ibn al-Hussein. And the man looks at him and he said, are you serious? He says, yes, he's just given this to you as a gift. And the man becomes embarrassed. He becomes embarrassed because he knows that he has spoken ill of Imam Zain-ul-Abideen alayhi salam. So he becomes truly embarrassed. The man returns back, knocks on the door of the fourth Imam. The fourth Imam opens the door and he says to him, what did you find? And he said, I found that that man became very embarrassed. And he was so embarrassed that he's asked me to ask you to forgive him. And he's going to come soon and ask you for forgiveness himself. And Imam alayhi salam smiled and he looked at this man. He said, look, that man threw an arrow at me. It missed. You picked it up and pierced it in my heart. Look at the way the Imam is now teaching people of what is morality and what is an ethical framework. Let me give you another example. Maybe I say this example in Urdu, just one small one. Yeah? 2 minutes? Is okay? Where's Mukiban? Okay, it's okay. Salawat wa Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. चौथे इमाम की ज़िंदगी में से कुछ मिसाल मैं पेश करना चाहता हूं जो अखलाक के ऊपर है। एक मिसाल है माल को गसब करना। माल को गसब करना हम कभी भी ख्याल नहीं करते। हमारी ग्रीड इस हद तक पहुंच गई है कि किसी भी तरीके से हम ये चाहते हैं कि हम दुनियावी आराम को हासिल करें। जैसे भी हमको कोई आराम, दुनियावी प्लेजर्स हमको मिल जाए, हम कोशिश करते हैं कि जिस तरह से भी मिल सके हम उसको हासिल कर सके। फ्रॉड करना, चोरी करना, झूठ बोलना। लेकिन मेरे चौथे इमाम का एक कहना है, उसका एक सेइंग है। मेरा चौथा इमाम कहता है कि देखो, हम कसम खाते हैं उस अल्लाह की। इमाम के अल्फाज पे आप गौर कीजिए। वो कहते हैं कि हम कसम खाते हैं उस अल्लाह की कि जिसने मुहम्मद को नबी बना के भेजा है। कसम, अजीब कसम है यार। हम कसम खाते हैं उस अल्लाह की कि जिसने नबी को, मुहम्मद को नबी बना के भेजा है कि अगर मेरे बाबा का कातिल उस तलवार को लेके आए अमानत के तौर पे, अगर मेरे बाबा का कातिल उस तलवार को लेके आए अमानत के तौर पे कि जिस तलवार से उसने मेरे बाबा के सर को कलम किया था, तो मैं कसम खा रहा हूं कि हम उस तलवार की अमानत में भी खियानत नहीं करेंगे। Look at the state of the fourth Imam. This is the state of the fourth Imam. This is how he is telling people on how to live. And then the best example that I can give is the example of Marwan ibn Hakam, right? And I think I may have said this example in this community before, but I will redo it. And I will just give you a brief synopsis of it because maybe some people have not heard it and it would be a good refresher. Marwan bin Hakam was the third Khalifa, was the son-in-law of the third Khalifa. He was the son-in-law of the third Khalifa. And he was actually the power behind the throne in Bani Umayyah. In fact, you remember that time, you will have heard that when Muawiyah died and Yazid sent a letter to Walid and said to Walid, go and get bayat from Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Medina, right? And Walid called Imam Hussein to his house, to his palace, so that he could give the bayat, to give allegiance to Yazid. And you remember Imam went with Abu Fadl Abbas alayhi salam and Ali Akbar alayhi salam, and he told them that I'm going inside and I will talk to them, and if I raise my voice, then you guys come in. You remember that story. Walid was sitting and he said to Imam Hussein that I want you to give bayat for Yazid, because Muawiyah has died and Yazid is now the Khalifa. So I want you to give bayat. And Imam Hussein said to Walid, ask me in the mosque publicly. Why are you asking me at night privately in your own home? You want to ask me for my bayat? Ask me in the mosque tomorrow publicly and I'll give you my response. At that time, it was this Marwan ibn Hakam, this Marwan who was sitting next to Walid. Walid was a bit of a chicken, and so Marwan ibn Hakam said to Walid, Walid, if he refuses to give bayat, kill him right now. Otherwise, he will not come back in your hands. This was Marwan ibn Hakam. He was the mastermind of a lot of the atrocities as it relates to Karbala. 1 year after the events of Karbala, the people of Medina have realized, after the khutbat of Imam Sajjad and Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, they realized that there was a problem with Yazid. So they sent a delegation to Sham. 1 year afterwards, the people of Medina sent a delegation to Sham. And they said, we want you to go to Sham and we want you to investigate that who is this Yazid, what is he like, and so on and so forth. So this delegation went, they looked at everything, they came back and they wrote a report. They wrote a report. And in that report that said that forget about Yazid being a Khalifa, we do not even think he is a Muslim. because he openly commits sins. And when this report came back in Medina, the people in Medina revolted. They revolted against the Banu Umayyah. They went against the Banu Umayyah. And this Marwan bin Hakam was the person in charge in Medina at that time. And when they went against the Banu Umayyah, Marwan bin Hakam realized that he had to flee from Medina, otherwise the people of Medina would kill him. So he took his children and his wife. His wife is who? The daughter of the third Khalifa, right? The daughter of Osman. He took his wife and his children and he wanted to flee Syria. Now he knew he could not, escape alone. He could not escape with his wife and children. He had to go alone because he had to hide. He had to go here and there and maybe stay a few days without food and so on and so forth. He didn't want to take his wife and children with him because they would slow him down. So what he decided was, he said, I should take them and give them and put them somewhere where they can have some safety and security. So he goes to the house of Abdullah bin Umar. Abdullah bin Umar is the son of the second Khalifa. Yeah? Umar ibn Khattab. And he goes to the house of Abdullah bin Umar and he says to Abdullah bin Umar, I have to go. I have to leave Medina. My wife and my children, I need you to give them refuge in your house. Abdullah bin Umar said, thank you very much. Have a nice day. Nothing doing, man. Close the door. He said, I'm not going to get involved in this. I got nothing to do with this, man. I give them refuge, I'm going to be in serious trouble. He went from house to house of the people that he knew. Everybody refused. Finally, he came to the house of the fourth Imam, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. And when he came to the house of the fourth Imam, he knocked on the door. Imam Sajjad opens the door. He says to Imam Sajjad, Ali ibn al-Hussein, he says that, oh Ali ibn al-Hussein, I have my wife and my children and I want to give them refuge because I have to leave Medina. Will you give refuge to my wife and my children? Imam did not ask him one question. And he said to him that bring your wife and your children into my house and I will give them refuge. For in my house, the people of Medina will not attack her. And they will not attack your children. This was an akhlaqi slap on the face of Marwan bin Hakam. You think the Imam had forgotten about Marwan and what Marwan had done? Imam had not forgotten. But it was the right thing to do. From a moral and ethical perspective, giving refuge to helpless women and children of that time was the right thing for the Imam to do. And he did not hesitate. He gave refuge to them. These are the lessons we learned from this fourth Imam. This fourth Imam is now able to capture through the pronunciation of his imamat, by developing the institution of majlis, he is able to unite the communities. By his invocations and du'as, he is able to spread the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by his moral and ethical behavior, he becomes a role model for the ummah to follow the right teachings of the Quran and the pristine teachings of the Ahlul-bayt. We are wallahi indebted to this Imam. We are indebted to this Imam. It's amazing that we don't discuss him that often. We don't talk about his role that often. Today, take your hearts to Medina. Take your hearts to Jannatul Baqi. Take your hearts where his grave lies and he is alone. Take your hearts to that place where his grave is in such a state that people are not even able to read the ziyarah in front of his grave. अज़दारान हुसैन, एक वक्त आता है वाक़यात करबला के बाद, एक सहाबी इमाम के पास आता है और ये सहाबी जो है इमाम के बहुत करीबी सहाबी था और वो इमाम से कहता है कि मेरे इमाम 20 साल गुज़र गए, क्या अब ये वक्त नहीं आया है कि आप इस गम को भूल जाए? بس یہ شخص کا یہ کہنا تھا. امام ایک مرتبہ طرب کے اس شخص کو کہتے ہیں کہ دیکھو تو نے انصاف نہیں کیا. قرآن میں پڑھو یعقوب کا واقعہ. یعقوب کو معلوم تھا کہ یوسف زندہ ہے, لیکن اتنا روئے کہ یعقوب کی آنکھیں سفید ہو گئی. امام کہتے ہیں کہ دیکھو میں نے اپنی نظروں سے میرے بابا کے لاشا کو دیکھا ہے. کیا تمہیں کوئی اندازہ ہے کہ جب کوئی لاشے کو پامال کیا جاتا ہے تو اس لاش کی کیا حالت ہوتی ہے؟ میں نے میری آنکھوں سے میرے بابا کا لاشا دیکھا ہے. وہ کہتے ہیں کہ دیکھو میں نے میرے 18 بنو ہاشم کے لاشوں کو دیکھا ہے. میرا 18 سال بھائی علی اکبر کے سینے میں برچی لگی اور میرے بابا نے برچی کے پھل کو میرے اکبر کے سینے سے نکالا ہے. کیا تمہیں معلوم ہے کہ میرا قاسم جو سرزمین کربلا کی میں میرے قاسم کی لاش پامال ہو گئی. تمہیں معلوم ہے کہ میرا عباس, میرا چچا عباس نہر فرات میں دونوں بازو شہید کر کے سو رہے ہیں. اور پھر امام کہتے ہیں کیا تمہیں یہ بھی معلوم ہے کہ میرا چھوٹا بھائی علی اصغر جب میرے بابا علی اصغر کو پانی لینے کے لیے گئے تھے تو حرملا نے علی اصغر کے گردن کو ایک کان سے دوسرے کان تک ذبح کر دیا ہے. یہ کہنا تھا, امام کہتے ہیں کہ میں جوان تھا لیکن مجبور اتنا تھا کہ میں شیر شہداء کی لاشوں کو دفن نہیں کر سکتا. تم میری کیفیت کو کیا سمجھو گے؟ وہ غلام کہتا ہے کہ اے میرے امام, شہادت تو آپ کے خاندان کی میراث ہے, خاندان کی میراث ہے, آپ کی وراثت میں شہادت ہے. امام کہتے ہیں کہ تو نے واپس انصاف نہیں کیا. اگر شہادت ہماری وراثت میں ہے تو کیا ہماری عورتوں کو جب کوفے اور شام کے بازار میں پھرایا گیا, ہماری عورتوں کے سر سے چادریں چھینی گئی, کیا وہ بھی ہماری وراثت میں ہے؟ کیا وہ بھی ہماری میراث ہے؟ ہمارے خیمے جلائے گئے اور ہماری بیویوں کے ہاتھ پس گردن باندھ دیے گئے, کیا یہ بھی ہماری وراثت میں ہے؟ اے میرا امام وہ منظر کیسے بھول سکتا ہے کہ شام کے دربار میں یہ کہا جاتا ہے جب اہل حرم آتے ہیں شام کے بازار میں, یزید ایک مرتبہ اہل حرم کو دیکھتا ہے اور پوچھتا ہے یہ کون ہے, یہ کون ہے, یہ کون ہے؟ کوئی کہتا ہے حاضی زینب, وہ حاضی کلثوم, وہ حاضی سکینہ. تب میرے امام پہ کیا گزری ہوگی. میرے امام روتے تھے جب بھی کسی کا نام آتا تھا, امام زار زار رونے لگتے تھے. یہاں تک کہ جب کسی نے میرے امام سے یہ پوچھا کہ آپ کو سب سے زیادہ مشکل کہاں ہوئی ہے تو امام چلا کے کہتے تھے الشام الشام الشام. سیال الذین ظلموا ایام قلبی ينقلبون انا للہ وانا الیہ راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this night, as we approach the night of Arba'in, and as the Zawar have gone into the lands of paradise to do the ziyarat of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provide them with security and safety, and so that they may be able to return to their homes in a safe and secure way. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are not there today. We are not there in Arba'in to do the ziyarat of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. But you are indeed most merciful. Our hearts are always in Baynul Haramain. We are always there between the Haram of Imam Abbas and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. We ask you that even though we may not be physically there, our hearts will be there, and that you may accept our ziyarat of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are many in our community who have difficulties, who have problems in their jobs, who have problems in their families, who have problems with sicknesses, with illnesses, and so on and so forth. We ask you, Allah, with the wasila of this fourth Imam, relieve the members of the community with all their problems and their issues. We ask you, Allah, that those who are sick, give them a full, fast, and quick recovery, inshallah. We ask you, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to hasten the reappearance of our Imam, Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala,